Welcome to the second weekend of October, and today I'm going to talk about one of the most groundbreaking horror movies of all time. Night of the Living Dead. This movie is truly a horror classic, and I saw it when I was about 11 or 12, I think. I was browsing YouTube back in the day, and it was mainly just trying to find stuff I wasn't allowed to watch at the time, and this came up. And a fun fact before I get into the movie: Night of the Living Dead did not have a copyright seal put on it when it first came out, and George A. Romero, the director, and also one of my favorite directors and favorite inspirations, has said that because of this, he and the other investors and makers of the film saw a little profit when it came out and later when it was on home video. But yeah, that's how I was introduced to it about 7 or 8 years ago on YouTube. And even back then, I could see it was a great film, and Night of the Living Dead was really the first horror movie to be done the way it was done, and it delved into the gorier aspect of horror before most horror films of its time. Like, I know there had been some bloody horror films, but I don't think really to this movie's extent. And as I said, I'm a huge fan of George A. Romero. I have loved pretty much every movie I've seen by him, and I have most of my collection here on display. Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, Season of the Witch, one of his lesser-known films, Creepshow, Monkey Shines, and his collaboration with Dario Argento, Two Evil Eyes. I would have put more up, but limited space on this couch. And Night of the Living Dead was George A. Romero's very first movie. Until then, he had primarily directed commercials, like TV commercials. And one of them, which I saw, was a pretty funny commercial about laundry detergent involving a Fantastic Voyage styled exploration, a miniaturized submarine traveling to study the detergent. I think that's what it was, and it was pretty funny. And George A. Romero, his passion for film started when he was very young, and I think he had to have been in New York for this to happen. Back in the day, like in the 50s, you could rent movies, but you had to rent the film reels in order to watch it, and yeah. And in New York, I think, where he lived, he would rent this movie called The Tales of Hoffman, and it really inspired him to eventually go into filmmaking as an adult. And the reason I'm bringing up New York is Martin Scorsese, when he was a young kid, he would also rent the movie Tales of Hoffman constantly. And if he would go down to the place where he'd rent the reel, the guy would tell Scorsese that, "Sorry, we don't have it. That Romero kid's watching it." That's a cool fact to know. And George A. Romero, from what I read, he was an intern of sorts on North by Northwest by Alfred Hitchcock. So that was pretty much his study of how films are made, and eventually his building blocks to where he came to when he made Night of the Living Dead. And Night of the Living Dead, it was made in 1968, and it was an independent movie, and it's still one of the most successful independent films ever made. It was done on a budget of about $100,000, and according to Romero in a Q&A he did, it made about $700,000 when it came out. So, sort of successful when it came out, but no one could foresee the all-time classic it would become. I read how some people say that while they see Night of the Living Dead as a classic, they don't think it's scary anymore, and while it may be a product of the 1960s, in my opinion, it still is very effective. Maybe not as scary in the sense of Nightmare on Elm Street or Videodrome or Angel Heart, but it has a very unnerving and kind of, I guess for lack of a better word, surreal feel to it, and pretty gothic feel. And before I get too far into how it was made, let me tell you about the plot of the movie. The film opens with Barbara and Johnny, a sister and brother, driving out to a cemetery to put a wreath on their father's grave. And when they arrive, Johnny is pretty clear that he doesn't really care to be there. And when he sees some odd-looking man wandering around the cemetery, he starts teasing Barbara, who's apparently very easy to scare, going, "They're coming to get you, Barbara." And then he points at the guy saying, "There's one of them now. Here he comes. I'm getting out of here." And she just thinks he's being a jerk. And as he looks back laughing, or not laughing, really just smiling, the man suddenly grabs Barbara and tries to attack her. And Johnny then tries to stop him. And the man, who is very lurchy and doesn't speak, he just groans, fights Johnny and then slams him into a gravestone, killing him when his head cracks into it. And then Barbara, now scared for her life, tries to run, and as she runs, she eventually finds a deserted house in the middle of a field. She runs into it and tries to hide there. And then a man named Ben shows up and gets in the house with her, telling her that more people like this man from the cemetery are attacking everybody all over the city or town that they're in, and it seems to be some sort of epidemic that is spreading. People suddenly attacking others and seeming like they're in kind of a trance. And inside the house, Ben and Barbara work to seal it up, board themselves in, and find supplies to keep themselves stocked until they know what to do or someone comes to save them. And although I haven't said it yet, and kind of appropriate I guess, but it's later revealed that all these tranced people trying to kill them are zombies. And the reason I kind of avoided saying the word zombie up until now is because the word zombie is never said once in Night of the Living Dead. And it was kind of established by this film and George A. Romero that for a proper zombie movie, you should never refer to The Walking Dead as zombies. And I don't get the rule entirely, but it's a pretty cool rule and it really works and it presents a real challenge. Like, what exactly do you call these things? And throughout the Living Dead series, that's often what they're called, and they're only referred to as zombies once in Dawn of the Dead. But other than that, they're just things. And so yeah, that's the majority of the film. After the first 10 minutes, this man named Ben and this woman named Barbara hide out in this house and try to figure a way to survive and possibly get help. And as the film goes on, more survivors are discovered in the house who have already been hiding there since the epidemic started. And I think the best way to put Night of the Living Dead is it's a survivalist film. It's about people trying to survive during a time of horror and shows what they do to defend themselves and how to try to keep themselves safe. And it kind of shows the idea of many people in a crisis trying to work together and people fighting and some people getting hysteric and some people wanting to be in charge and have full control. Overall, it is probably the best survivalist horror film I've ever seen, and it really creates a tense atmosphere because virtually the whole film takes place just inside this house that everybody is hiding in. And you never really feel claustrophobic because it's a pretty big house. And I think this is a good point to make. These guys are pretty lucky that this is the house that they found, because it has just about everything they need for this type of situation. There's loose boards, there's doors, a bunch of wood lying around that they can use to board up the place. And there's also boxes of huge nails lying around that they can use to make sure the boards are securely put in there. And they also got food, and while looking around for boards and nails, Ben discovers a rifle in one of the closets. That's very lucky. And also they find a radio and a television, which allow them to see on the news just what is going on and be kept updated, what are the best precautions to take and what exactly they should do. And the movie has a great pace, because the whole zombie coming in to attack Barbara happens within the first 5 minutes or so, and her getting to the house happens before we even reach 10 minutes. And the whole film, as I said, mostly takes place inside the house. And the movie's only about 95 minutes, and it just flows so well. You never feel like something goes on too long, and the pacing is great. Some of the transitioning could be a little iffy, but not much. Not enough to have it be a setback. And a lot of the characters, their dialogue, well, not 100% perfect. A lot of their dialogue is, for the time, it feels real. It feels mostly realistic. Like, you could see people saying this stuff. Like, it's hard to make a movie without people swearing these days and have it sound realistic. But this movie of the 60s pulls it off very well. And you can feel the tension as the film goes on, and the idea of desperation and wonder as to if they're going to survive, and also the feeling of hopelessness, like there isn't going to be any way out, or it's inevitable that they will all die. And you feel the urge, the need to survive, and just the feeling and the energy to keep on going and try to figure something out. The idea that they need to not give up and try to get out. This whole movie is just incredible. You won't see many films like it from the 60s, and it's very raw, it's very well made, and from what I've read and heard, George A. Romero, he didn't set out to make a groundbreaking film. It was essentially to just make a film that would hopefully do well at the drive-in, and which it did. And although I usually save this for the end of my reviews, I'm going to say it now. If I had to give a rating to Night of the Living Dead, I would give it 9.8 out of 10 stars, because this movie is just fuck yeah. It is inspiring to anyone who wants to be an independent filmmaker. It is thrilling. It definitely is scary. Not in the sense of more of the later horror films that come out in the 80s and onward, but in its own style. It has a very great, very chilling style. And I think I've talked about the plot to the best extent that I can, and so now I'm gonna go into the cast. First I'll talk about the two main characters. The character Barbara in the beginning, when you see her and her brother Johnny arrive at the cemetery, it is kind of a normal scene. Like, there's this very chilling music score going on, so you know that it's just the music sets up that this is gonna be a hectic, scary movie. And I've always believed that music is a key part in making a horror movie work. Have it be scary, have it be suspenseful. And funny enough, most of the music in Night of the Living Dead is stock music from other movies and music that's in the public domain. And most of the movies that the stock music comes from are very cheesy B movies from the 50s and early 60s that aren't really considered that good. So it's pretty cool to see it be used so effectively here. And the music, it really does make your heart beat a little, makes you grab the edge of your chair or your couch. And I just think it's funny that this music comes from movies that probably wouldn't make your 10-year-old scream. But yeah, in the opening scene, it's mostly pretty subtle, but you feel the foreshadow of what's to come. And Barbara and her brother Johnny, you can tell that they don't really get along, but they're family, and you know how family is with siblings and cousins and stuff. Some people that aren't really close or don't know each other that well, and they may not be pleasant all the time. But you can tell deep down, like, it's kind of like what I said with Bud and Lou. Even if they're a complete asshole or a dick, you can tell that part of them would feel bad if something actually happened to this person. This brother and sister relationship is nowhere near as bad as the one between Abbott and Costello, but they do have issues. And Johnny, his famous line, "They're coming to get you, Barbara." That line is probably well known amongst many horror fans and movie buffs, or people who like to get scary around Halloween. But I'm pretty sure a lot of people probably don't know where this infamous line comes from. Maybe people got it from Shaun of the Dead, which pays tribute to the George A. Romero zombie movies. Shaun of the Dead, that movie is fucking amazing. It had me laughing so hard it hurt. It had me laughing on the piss your pants edge. But back to this. The opening lines, before anything creepy even happens between Barbara and Johnny, yeah, it could be considered a little generic, but at the same time it feels kind of like real talk. And surprisingly, for a low-budget film like this, just about every actor in this movie does a terrific job. They deliver their lines in a way that makes it just flow right. It sounds real. Because it's always hard to deliver certain lines of dialogue and make it sound like it would in the real situation with the real emotion. But everyone here, they really pull it off. And Russell Steiner as Johnny, he delivers his lines well, and it's not a big role, but you can get the feeling that there's more depth that isn't being shown here. Not a bad thing, like, less is more, and a problem you get with certain movies is you give the characters too much backstory or exposition when you introduce them, or as it goes on, like, okay, it's best to have characters who are three-dimensional, but not every single character has to have every moment about them explained immediately or over the course. You can make them very interesting by not doing too little, but just doing enough where you get a sense of who they are. And also, for horror films particularly, like George Romero's and John Carpenter's movies, they make movies where the characters are sort of half and half, where some you like, some you don't, and at the same time, it's done in a way where any of these characters could die and it won't ruin the story, and you will probably feel something, but at the same time, you will still be able to love the movie, think it's great, and it won't ruin the experience of the film itself for you. Now I think I've covered Johnny enough. The character Barbara, who's played by Judith O'Dea, it's the O, the Cinto, and the D, and yeah, Dia. Judith O'Dea, she does the character pretty well. Barbara isn't the most complex character. I mean, I just said not every character has to be complex, but yeah, like, you get the feeling there's a lot to her in the beginning, and After the zombie attack in the first 5 minutes, her character becomes very scared for her life, and throughout the rest of the film she carries that fear, and she becomes almost catatonic in a way. And I read that many feminist movie scholars have questioned or criticized this part, and usually I think to have a character who doesn't do anything or is useless can be a real setback to a movie. But here it's not entirely pointless as to why she becomes the way she does. She is obviously not used to this, and she's a normal person, and her scene with Johnny at the beginning establishes that she's got emotional issues. So what happens really scares her, and she doesn't know what to think or do. And seeing her so scared throughout the rest of the film, it really gives Judith O'Dea the chance to do a lot of facial acting to convey the emotion of the character just through her expressions and her quietness and her sometimes very still look when she sits down. I really like it when someone can make a character work when they don't say a lot, and people forget facial acting can really go a long way. And you feel sorry for her, and the whole thing is just a big tragedy that hurts everyone in the world around it. Before I go to the character Ben, I feel I should mention this. A very cool thing about most of Romero's zombie films is there's never any explanation or any true explanation as to why the dead are coming back to life. And Night of the Living Dead, the first time Romero did this kind of storyline, obviously he hadn't thought up the don't explain it part yet, and there's a scene where most of the characters are watching TV, and they see this news reporter talk about how it's suspected that a probe in space that had orbited Venus and crashed and burned or was shot down was carrying some kind of radioactive material that it encountered in space. And the characters theorize that this could be the reason why the dead are coming back to life. But for the most part in the series, there's never a definite answer as to why the zombies are rising. And although a lot of people feel for some horror films there should be an explanation as to why certain otherworldly events are happening, I feel like never explaining why it's happening in this kind of storyline really makes it work. Well, some movies can have an explanation, but for Romero's movies, I feel it works best without it. Because it is a scary idea, like, you're going about your day, and then all of a sudden, the dead come back. And you have no idea why it's happening, it's just happening. And it adds further into the panic and mass hysteria and tension that continues throughout the series, showing, yeah, people don't know what's going on, they're not sure how to stop it. So I just think that's a great aspect, because, yeah, imagine the dead start coming back to life and attack the living. Everybody would have their theories about what was happening. People would try to find an explanation. Scientists, religious people, everybody would try to figure out what was going on. And the thought of never figuring out, that is very scary, and it just adds further to this series that shows sort of the breakdown of humanity and morality. The sequels would delve into it more, but essentially that is the point of Romero's series. He often tries to show that you have the humans and then you have the Walking Dead, And The Walking Dead in Romero's movies, Night of the Living Dead was the first zombie movie to introduce the idea of zombies being cannibals, eating anything that was living, and Romero would have these mindless and unable to reason with creatures that do this horrible, grotesque thing to innocent people. But then he brings the idea of having the living who are being hunted by the dead, hunting the dead, and also showing that in many ways the living themselves are not that much better than the dead. Like the human characters, especially in Dawn and Day of the Dead and the later films in the series, they do a lot of horrible things themselves, and essentially the big question would be, who are the real monsters? If I was reviewing Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, or the 1990 remake of Night of the Living Dead, I could give this part of the story arc more weight, but it wasn't explored as much in Night of the Living Dead, so for this part, that's where I feel I'm going to end this. Now, Barbara may be the first main character who's introduced in the movie, but the true star of the film, and the way it's set up, you think Barbara is going to be the main focus of the film, but the true star is Dwayne Jones as Ben, this man who suddenly shows up at the house that Barbara has run into to hide, and he has experienced the zombies as well, and he immediately comes in and helps her make sure the place is safe and try to board up. And the way he comes in, it's just he comes in and he tells her what's going on, and even though they don't know each other, he tells her they need to work together to survive, to try and find a way out. And Ben is a great survivalist, and just like, once again, it's lucky that they found this particular house. And Ben, he is a great character. Like, he just takes charge and he leads the whole film all the way. And he's very smart, but he doesn't know everything, and he's just doing what he thinks is right. And the character of Ben, he was a groundbreaking character back in 1968. For those who don't know, the character Ben is African American, and although this wasn't the first film to have a black man in the lead role, Night of the Living Dead is the first American film with a black man in the lead role, and the subject of his race is never brought up once. Yeah, and George A. Romero said that when he wrote the screenplay with his co-writer for that movie, John A. Russo, he said that when they wrote the character of Ben, in their mind they saw him as white, and when Dwayne Jones auditioned, George just realized this is the man for the part, and he just cast him. He was just the best man, and he was like, okay, forget it, he's black now. And they just kept it pretty much to the same way that it was written, according to George A. Romero. And Dwayne Jones, yeah, he was a great lead for this movie. He has a great authority to him in the way he talks. He's very confident, and he's human, and when he talks about dealing with the zombies before he found the house to Barbara, you hear the emotion and the horror in his voice, but you also see the clear mind and how he's staying on his feet, and he's not going to give in to the fear, unlike Barbara has. And even though he barely knows Barbara, he tries to establish I guess, rapport, and a rapport is definitely established between them, at least for Ben's perspective. Barbara is so traumatized that she can't really think about where she stands with Ben. And Ben is pretty badass. I will admit, he's not as badass as Tony Todd in the 1990 remake, but at the same time, Dwayne Jones does a great job. He just fights the zombies, hits them in the head, he stabs them in the head, shoots them in the head, and that's an important plot point to know. It's established in Night of the Living Dead that the only way to kill the dead is to shoot them in the brain, or to cut the head from the body. So yeah, gives a good excuse to show as many headshots as possible. And Dwayne Jones, after Night of the Living Dead, he didn't do a lot of movies. In fact, he became a college professor afterwards. And from what I've read and heard, he never really saw the other zombie films or the other George A. Romero movies. And he sadly passed away in 1988 from, I believe, some kind of cardiac arrest. I can't remember exactly what it said was the cause of death for Dwayne, but it was along those lines, and I think he was in his early 50s at the time. But he was the original black horror movie star, and he was also the original black action star. It really was groundbreaking, and it came out just around the time that Martin Luther King had been assassinated, and in a movie like this, it just paved the way for so many films in the horror genre and otherwise. Dwayne Jones, it's sad that he passed away and he didn't do more movies. But Night of the Living Dead, he is just in command, baby. Before I move on to the rest of the cast, I just want to mention this fact, because I want to mention a few before I need to end this episode. George A. Romero apparently smashed a butterfly to prepare people for a difficult scene, and not as bad as Cannibal Holocaust, but even with certain insects like ants, I have no problem squashing, or beetles, or if I see a bee, I will squish it as hard as I can, but certain things like a grasshopper or butterfly, you just can't bring yourself to hurt it. Maybe grasshopper, but butterflies, you can see why, and it is effective and definitely better than Cannibal Holocaust. For those who don't know, Cannibal Holocaust is a 1980s Italian horror film, and aside from being a film about cannibals, it has a lot of animal deaths that were actual murders of real animals that were killed for the movie, and even the director of that film regrets doing it. That might have gotten a bit dark even for this. The other main players in Night of the Living Dead are Carl Hardman as Harry Cooper, Marilyn Eastman as Helen Cooper, and Kyra Sean as Karen Cooper. Her last name spelled S-C-H-O-N. And they play a very dysfunctional type of family who are hiding in the basement of the house along with this young, I guess, early 20s couple named Tom and Judy, played by Keith Wayne, Tom, and Judith Riley, Judy. Yeah. The characters of Tom and Judy, Keith Wayne as Tom, he does a very good job. He plays a scared but optimistic and just trying to do whatever it takes to stay alive type of man. And he's young, kind of muscular, pretty good looking. And you get the feeling this character was put in there just so there'd be a cute young man for the audience. And he is very cute, and it's not like Dwayne Jones is not very sexy himself, but yeah, Keith Wayne, he's very attractive, and as Tom, he does do a very good job. Like, the character, he's not dumb, he's just not, he doesn't know what to do, and he needs someone to lead him, and he chooses Ben over the other character, who we'll get into in a sec. And he cares very much about his girlfriend Judy, and okay, I will admit, Judy is the weakest character in the movie. Like, not weak as in she can't do shit. She doesn't have a lot to her other than that she's scared, but she doesn't totally show it. All that's really to her is that she loves Tom, and she can't bear to see him go, and she can't bear to have anything happen to him. And Judy and Tom have a romantic scene that normally would be pretty painful to watch, and it does serve a little purpose, but at the same time it's pretty generic and doesn't really do much for the movie itself. And I get the feeling it was put in there just to give the film a little romance. But at the same time, it didn't bother me. Just goes to show that George A. Romero is very skilled, because some things that normally would piss me off, he was able to do it, and even if it was pointless, it didn't kill any part of my love for the movie, it didn't kill my mood, it didn't kill my appreciation at all, and it worked pretty fine. And I guess the romantic scene does give a bit more reason for what happens in the middle of the film. Ben drove up to the house in a pickup truck, and it's low on gas, but on the way in, Barbara discovered a gas pump, and they know if they can just get to the gas pump and fill the truck, they could get everybody out. And Ben and Tom decide to go out alone, and Judy, because she loves Tom so much, doesn't want to lose him, so she just runs out and goes in the truck with him. And they head out to the pump, and it's locked, so Ben tries shooting off the lock, and that results in the gasoline catching fire and spreading to the truck, and it leads to the truck exploding, and it's a pretty good explosion. And of course this leads to probably the grisliest scene as far as gore in the movie, where the zombies, this big army of zombies, go up to the pickup truck, which is in flames, and they just each one grabs a chunk of Tom and Judy, and they just gorge themselves on their dripping flesh. Even by today, this scene is very nasty. It just shows cannibalism at its juiciest, and the music score, once again, does a great job of creating this disturbing and nightmarish world and look. And Night of the Living Dead is a black and white movie, and the black and white here really helps. Like, it makes the gore surprisingly even more disturbing. Like, you see all the wetness, the dripping of the blood, and you just kind of dread what it would look like in color. It's kind of like the boxing scenes from Raging Bull, where the black and white actually makes the blood more chilling to watch. And Marilyn Eastman, who plays the wife in the Cooper family, She was actually a makeup artist for Night of the Living Dead as well, and she plays a zombie next to her character inside the house. She plays a zombie with a rotting face who grabs a big cockroachy looking bug and just gorges on it. And maybe you'll see that as gross, but the sound she makes you think, sounds tasty. And she does, from what I'm pretty sure she wasn't the only makeup artist on this film, but she does a pretty good job. And Marilyn Eastman said that as far as the makeup, she wasn't really concerned with the rotting flesh look. She was more concerned with the looks on the zombies' faces, that she wanted to just stay there like the faces of death. And the zombies, by the way, they all look fantastic. Some look very rotty and gooey and pussy, while others just look pale. Yes, even in black and white. And some really stick out and appear in many scenes, and you see them a lot. And the famous scene where the burned human flesh is consumed, George A. Romero said it was a bit of a waste putting them through the makeup, because after eating what they used as a substitute for human flesh, he said that they ended up looking pretty pale in real life. And just so you know, what they used was roasted ham, and since it's black and white, they used roasted ham drenched in chocolate syrup. Yeah. But yeah, black and white chocolate syrup makes a good fake blood. And there's a scene where the character Tom hacks up a zombie's hand, and what they did was they made a fake hand out of clay and just filled it with chocolate syrup and pretty much let him have at. And lastly, from a production point of view, Marilyn Eastman, when George A. Romero was trying to think of a way to kill the zombies with John A. Russo, his co-writer, she said, "Why don't you throw pies in their face?" Those who have seen Dawn of the Dead will get what this fact eventually led to in this movie. The other main characters are the Cooper family, and the first up is Carl Hardman as Harry Cooper, who's the father, and in a movie full of zombies, he is probably, like, next to the zombies, the closest thing this movie has to an antagonist. His character is that type of character who, in the middle of a big panic, he wants to be in charge, he wants full control, he believes what he thinks is the right answer, and he's always fighting even though there's no reason to, and his fear is taking over his rational thinking. And he's always fighting with Ben, and he wants to lead them all, and he thinks being in the basement, or the cellar as he calls it, is the safest place to be. And despite being a real grumpy, teeth-gritting asshole, he is not completely flawed. Eventually he realizes they do have to work together, if only for a while. He realizes that he needs to work with everybody to keep everything stable, to keep them all sort of as a unit. When Ben and Tom try to escape, they need someone to throw Molotov cocktails out to distract the zombies, who, by the way, are afraid of fire. And Harry Cooper says he'll do it, and the fact that he helped out with that says a lot. And when Tom and Judy die in the fire, and Ben comes back to the house, he yells at Cooper to let him in, and Cooper, scared in a very cowardly way, I guess. I don't like using that word, but I guess in the very cowardly way, just doesn't move to help let him in, and so Ben shoots the door open and then tries to board it up before the zombies get in. And Cooper, realizing they need to board it up, runs in to help out with that. And it's not really a redeeming moment. It's moreover just to either protect himself or his family, but shows that he's not too much of an asshole that he will not work or try to make things better. Essentially, he does lead to things becoming worse, but you can see that for a while anyway, before things get worse, he does try to help out. The other main character is Helen Cooper, played by Marilyn Eastman, and Helen comes off as the wife in an abusive relationship who sort of takes it, but she has her limit, and she will stand up for herself when her husband pushes her too far. And she's more level-headed, clear-minded, and tries to work with everybody to get things done. And it's mainly through her persuasion that gets Harry to some extent work with the others. And she's a concerned mother, and a main part of the film is that Harry and Helen's daughter, Karen Cooper, was bitten by a zombie before they came to the house, and she's in the basement very sick. And there isn't a lot to the Karen character other than that she's sick and possibly dying. And Kyra Sean, she only has one line, and it's simply after Helen says, "Baby, it's Mommy," Karen says, "I heard." And you can sense and this is one of the few redeeming things about Harry Cooper that doesn't make him likable or good, but shows you his human quality. He and Helen are scared for their daughter, and they don't know what to do, and overall they just want to get her out to a hospital for help. And the stress that she has as a mother, you can totally see. And then there is what is, even today, one of the most chilling scenes ever that I've ever seen in a movie. And it's when the zombies are breaking into the house. Anyone who's seen the movie will know this. The zombies are breaking in, and it seems like they're all going to die, and Harry has been shot by Ben after trying to fight him for control of the rifle. And Harry falls into the basement with his sick daughter. And Helen, seeing no escape, runs down to try and save her daughter. And when she gets down there, she walks in on the horrifying image of her own daughter as a zombie eating the flesh off her own father. And Helen, so horrified and overwhelmed, and she just breaks down crying, saying, "Oh baby," and her daughter, now an undead monster with no feelings or real thoughts anymore, simply walks over to her mother with a sneer of hunger, with the intent of eating her mother. And Helen, scared and horrified and sad, falls down on her back, and the daughter grabs a garden trowel off a wall, and as Helen lays there emotionally helpless, her daughter raises the trowel and just stabs into her mother over and over and over again, slowly. And you can, even though it's not as graphic as most modern movies, you can totally feel the pain and the grisliness of every stab that Karen takes into her mother. And the music, the sound effects in this scene are it just sends the scared chills down your spine and makes you feel like screaming yourself. And the way the shots are set up, just the right angles in the black and white area, the shadows. This is one of the best and most disturbing scenes ever done. And an interesting fact to know, originally Harry was going to die first, and when Helen walked in, it was supposed to be Harry gorging on their daughter. But George Romero and John A. Russo, I guess, thought that would be, even for this film, that was too disturbing. Wait until Dawn of the Dead, and so they decided to switch it and have it be the daughter eating the father. Either way, it could have worked. The walking in part could have worked either way, but the stabbing of the mother, it works better with the daughter. And the aftermath shot of Helen is very chilling to look at. So that is the majority of the cast, and the only actors I have left to mention are S. William Hinsman, who plays the very first zombie seen in the film at the beginning with the cemetery. And he's a very good zombie actor. Fun fact, the groans he made during his first scene, some of them were real because Russell Steiner, Johnny, when they wrestled for this scene, he accidentally kneed Hinsman in the groin. That's one way to get groans. And Hinsman, I read, was an investor in the movie, and so was Carl Hardman. And Hardman and Russell Steiner are actually the credited producers of the movie. Oh, I forgot to mention this. Carl Hardman's daughter played Karen Cooper. Yeah, Kyra Shigon. She is Carl Hardman's daughter, and it's pretty cool. Yeah, and Marilyn Eastman. She is Kyra's godmother. So yeah, it's like kind of a cool family project. And lastly, there are some reporters seen on the TV that the characters watch, and two of these reporters, one during a news coverage of Washington, D.C. I think, is George Romero himself. You'll see him as the 6'5" towering reporter. And at the very end of Night of the Living Dead, there's a field reporter talking to a sheriff who's like, "Have some coffee, you're doing all the hard work, you take it." And that reporter is played by a guy who goes by the name Chili Billy Cardile. Yeah, that's how he's credited in the end credits, and it's a cool name, and he would also play a reporter in the 1990 remake, and his daughter, Sarah Cardile, she would be the star of Day of the Dead. So, yeah, Romero, he really works closely with a lot of great actors. I need to wrap this up, so I'm going to mention two last things. Originally, Barbara was gonna be a stronger character. And this is probably the last time you'd see a main female character this weak in a George A. Romero film, because his trademark is actually having strong female and minority characters. And this would be later applied for the remake. Night of the Living Dead has what is probably not the most, but is one of the all-time most tragic endings of any movie ever. Everybody dies in this movie, and it's the most tragic when the character Ben, who has been the sole survivor, has hidden himself in the cellar and kept himself awake all night to watch out for any zombies. And there's a posse of people outside shooting zombies, and Ben, curious, goes up to check it out, and when the posse sees him in a window, they're just like, hit him right between the eyes, and then Ben's just shot in the head, and he falls over dead, and the posse goes, good shot, okay, that's another one for the fire. And that's where the movie ends. It ends with photos of these redneckish hunters coming in and carrying Ben out and throwing him on a fire with the other zombie corpses. And a lot of people see this as a commentary on racism because they shoot Ben without checking to see if he's a zombie. But according to George A. Romero, that was the original ending in the script as far back when he and John A. Russo originally wrote him as a white guy. So yeah, and it totally looks like that. Like this is a commentary on racism, and that kind of message would later carry in the sequels, but here, it's a total coincidence. Just ironic, and you can see it any way you want, and it's an awesomely tragic ending. I love Night of the Living Dead. It is a great film, and Dawn of the Dead, which I will probably talk about next year, is one of my top 10 favorite movies of all time. It is a true landmark in cinema, in horror, and just film culture in general. See you next week.